let me know when I'm good to go.
Great. I can start by reading the legal announcement.
Please do.
Mr. Chair. As a result of the ongoing public health emergency related to COVID-19, Executive Order 202.1 as extended authorizes public boards to meet remotely and take action without permitting in-person access to meetings. The public must have the ability to view or listen to the proceedings. An audio and video recording of today's meeting will be accessible from DASNY's website within 2 days, and a transcript will be posted as soon as practicable under the circumstances. And for additional information on this, you can see DASNY's website. Unless there are any questions, I will now take the roll, Mr. Chair, and turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much.
We have with us today our Finance Committee Chair, Jerry Romsky, Al Carney, our Board Chair, Tracy Raleigh, Board members John Johnson, John Gardner, Joan Sullivan, Beryl Snyder, and Tracy Raleigh. Joining from DASNY staff are our President, Ruben McDaniel, Vice President Paul Koopman, Portia Lee, Kim Ellis, Ricardo Salomon, Jeff Gordon, Deb Fasser, Dave Ostrander, Matt Bergen, Diane Folletti, Alex Sardine, Maria Carrasco, Caroline Griffin, and myself, Sarah Richards. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome everyone to the May 2021 meeting of the Finance Committee. Hopefully this will be the last Finance Committee meeting by way of Zoom. And hopefully we'll be meeting in person sometime in June with a little luck. So that's sort of a bright outlook ahead of us. Anyway, without any further comments, I guess first up on the agenda is the adoption of the meeting minutes from the March 31st meeting of the Finance Committee, which was the second meeting we had in March. So hopefully members of the committee had an opportunity to review those meeting minutes, and assuming such, can I please get a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
So moved.
Thank you very much.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm all in favor. Aye.
Aye.
There's any opposed? None. So that motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll be looking at 3 resolutions today. Thankfully, it's things seem to be picking up again. First up is Matt with the EHS Towers LLC financing. So thank you, Matt, and please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. The Finance Committee is being asked to recommend to the full board a 19-year term for a bond issue in an amount not to exceed $19 million on behalf of EHS Towers LLC. The financing that you're considering is the partial refunding and restructuring of DASNY's Educational Housing Services CUNY Student Housing Project Insured Revenue Bonds, Series 2005, and similar to the recent SUNY Dormitory Facilities and FIT Student Housing Corporation's transactions, this is being done to provide near-term debt service relief due to the low occupancy rates, which are a result of the pandemic. As described in the report, in 2005, DASNY issued these bonds to finance the construction of a residence hall with approximately 600 beds on the campus of the City College of New York, which is incorporated within the City University of New York system. To provide some background, we originally did a financing with Educational Housing Services Incorporated, or EHS, in 2005. And EHS is a not-for-profit corporation formed in 1987 to provide college students with housing in New York City. EHS was added to DASNY's statute in 1998, and DASNY's statute was further amended in 2008 to authorize DASNY financing not only for EHS directly, but also for its wholly owned corporations or limited liability companies. Subsequent to this amendment, all the rights and obligations of EHS in the project that was financed in 2005 and all of the related financing documents were assigned to EHS Towers LLC, a wholly owned, bankruptcy remote, not-for-profit subsidiary of EHS. The purpose of this was to facilitate the financing structure to be able to utilize a bankruptcy remote entity. The institution thereby became the borrower with respect to the Series 2005 bonds, and EHS Towers LLC will also be the borrower with respect to the proposed Series 2021 bonds. it's important to note that the debt service on both the Series 2005 bonds and the proposed Series 2021 bonds, they're both payable from revenues of the project, and it is non-recourse to both EHS and EHS Towers LLC. To the extent that the project revenues are not sufficient to service this debt, CUNY guarantees any shortfalls through the support agreement. We're currently discussing this partial refunding and restructuring of the Series 2005 bonds in the context of providing 2.5 years of debt service relief. And this amounts to approximately $4.4 million of debt service relief annually. Current thoughts are that after the debt service on the proposed refunding and restructuring bonds is anticipated to mature after the 2035 maturity of the 2005 bonds. And as this partial refunding and restructuring is done for upfront savings, it does not provide aggregate savings on a net present value basis. It is anticipated that the bond issue will be secured by a policy of municipal bond insurance, a leasehold mortgage on the property, the assignment of the student rentals, a debt service reserve fund if required, and the support agreement of the City of University of New York. And this is really the crux of the security, as to the extent that project revenues are not sufficient to service the debt, CUNY guarantees any shortfalls through the support agreement. The expected insured ratings are A2 and AA. And finally, in looking at the transaction summary, although we have requested flexibility, we are anticipating this to be a fixed rate, taxable, bond insured transaction, with the restructuring providing near-term debt service relief due to the low occupancy rates, which are a result of the pandemic. And we are planning to come back to the next DASNY board meeting for the adoption of documents. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Matt, for that nice presentation. Are there any questions or concerns from either any of the Finance Committee members or any of the other board members?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Al. Yep.
it's Al. So Matt, just for clarity for me and for the record, the existence of the support agreement makes it the creation of a debt service reserve fund less likely. Is that the intended conclusion?
You know, Mr. Chairman, the debt service reserve fund is not required. As we go through the discussions with the various parties, it may be determined that it is required, but we still have not come to the final conclusion on that.
Okay, all right. That was it for me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, I had a question or two. One, I'm sure it's rather obvious, but I just think I should restate it. This is really a mechanism to help the Educational Housing Services, Inc. through, I guess, what is a COVID emergency, and hopefully that emergency is sort of hopefully soon in the, I'm not going to say rearview mirror, but close to it. And that's the point of this, right? That's the logic behind the refunding.
Correct. Similar to the SUNY dormitory facilities
Correct.
transaction and the FIT Student Housing Corporation transaction, occupancy rates are very low. Thereby, the revenues are not coming in. And this financing is to facilitate near-term debt service relief.
So it's another example of how DASNY as the organization are helping the various educational institution through the current crisis and hopefully into a better light, I guess. Is that pretty fair to say? Good.
That's fair to say. Yeah.
And I just had one other question. Is the CUNY, I'm going to say backstop by the Capstone under their agreement? I'm just curious how that thing worked. You know, Capstone is
Capstone is more of the manager of the project. So
Okay.
that is, the support agreement is separate and distinct and away from Capstone.
So Capstone is really just sort of like acting as a managing agent, so to speak, for that building?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Chairman Roski, before
Yes.
we go to a vote, I just want to make a couple quick comments.
Sure.
One is, I won't say this profusely tomorrow, but I just don't want to underestimate or just let go by. The staff did a great job on this transaction, first identifying that CUNY, being the underlying responsible party for this, would face a similar situation that both FIT and SUNY faced, as you rightly point that out. But, the staff did a great job of identifying that, working through with the CUNY folks on the legal side, then bringing in EHS. Not a simple thing to do. They did a great job of pulling that together. And then from a credit perspective, a lot of work went into that. So I just want to say, kudos to Portia, Matt, and the full team on this one for taking the initiative, getting it, parsed up, working through the structure, and then coming up with a solution that I think really works well for everybody, particularly one of our best clients on the construction side, that being CUNY. So I want to say that for the record, for the board members too here. Second, one of the reasons we need to have a special board meeting in a couple of weeks is because this transaction needs to close before our June board meeting. And you'll recall our June board meeting is late this year, as it always is because of the annual audit. So, again, we have several transactions on the special board meeting, but this was kind of the first one that came up, and that is the rationale for it. So I just wanted to make those 2 points today so that I could not have to make them tomorrow.
Remind me, Ruben, the date of the special board meeting again? I'm sure I got it in my calendar somewhere, but just,
Yeah, the board meeting itself is on May the 19th. The finance
Oh, that's
committee
right.
meeting will be
That's
done
right.
the evening before on the
Got it.
18th.
okay.
And we will
great.
have 4 transactions on that agenda as of now.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, maybe we'll do our first live finance committee meeting maybe in a couple of weeks. That might be exciting. We'll talk about that. Right?
We'll see how tomorrow goes.
Thank you. Yep. We'll see how tomorrow goes. Good. Okay. Anyway, are there any other questions or concerns related to this specific transaction?
I just echo, this is Tracy. Raleigh, I just echo the staff report was really well done. I just wanted to make sure I understood the principal amortization between 2 years. I'm trying to figure out what I couldn't figure out was, and apologies if it's there and I missed it, that there's actually 2.5 years of debt service relief. So it looks like it's just the structure. It looks like it's deferring for 15 years.
That's correct.
Right? Yep.
It's 2.5 years of debt service relief. And so that amounts to about 4.4 million annually. And the 4.4 is both principal and interest. So they'll capitalize the interest and they are basically having a debt service holiday for 2.5 years.
For 2.5 years.
And Tracy, the technical term for this is a scoop and chuck transaction. It is not unusual in the tax exempt market where you have a difficult credit situation, whether it's because of, in this case, the good news is it's because of a natural disaster as opposed to, some performance issue. But this is not an unusual structure. But also in the marketplace during the pandemic, a lot of entities have done this structure, and the market's been very accepting, recognizing that they'd rather have a strong current portfolio than to spend all your money today and not have money in the future. So
Sure.
Again, but that's what this structure is.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ruben. Anything else on that, Tracy?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, John Gardner, or anybody else who might be on the call? Any concerns or questions? Hearing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to recommend approval of this transaction at tomorrow's full board meeting.
I'll move it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you
Second.
very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Tracy. All in favor, aye. None
Aye.
opposed. That motion carries. Again, thank you, Portia and staff and everyone else for bringing this transaction to us. And we look forward to its, final adoption sometime in a couple of weeks. Next up on the agenda is our favorite smaller transactions, the PIT sales tax. It's small today, right? It's only like 1.8 or something, as I remember, 1.8 billion. And Matt, that's on your plate as well. So please take us away. Thank you. This one is, by the way, a little bit more sort of confusing than a typical PIT or sales tax. At least that was my thought on it, Matt. So maybe with that sort of preliminary comment, you might sort of take us through it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the Finance Committee is being asked to recommend to the full board the issuance of multiple series of tax exempt and or taxable fixed and or variable rate bonds issued at one or more times with a term of 13 years in an amount not to exceed $2 billion under either the sales tax revenue bond program and or the personal income tax revenue bond program. However, at this time, the current plan is to issue under the personal income tax revenue bond program. And I want to start out by talking about the recent fiscal year 2022 budget. In the fiscal year 2022 budget, it included language authorizing the issuance of state-supported debt to provide for the legal defeasance of bonds issued by the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corporation. The state is currently paying an annual payment of $170 million through June 30th, 2034, subject to annual appropriation in relation to those bonds. The state's $170 million annual obligation is to the Local Government Assistance Corporation, or LGAC. LGAC is to then transfer this $170 million payment each year to the City of New York, which in turn has assigned these monies to pay the Star C bonds. Pursuant to the language in the budget, the obligation of LGAC to make this $170 million annual payment to the City of New York is terminated once the Star C bonds have been defeased. As such, this defeasance of the Star C bonds eliminates the state's obligation to make this $170 million payment to LGAC. The fiscal year 2022 budget also included language authorizing the issuance of state-supported debt for the purpose of refunding DASNY's secured hospital bonds. And the state is currently paying the debt service on the secured hospital bonds through the state service contracts. So to sum it up, we are seeking authorization for the bonds to be issued for the following purposes: the legal defeasance of the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corporation's Sales Tax Asset Revenue Bonds Fiscal 2015 series, and the termination of the state's $170 million annual corresponding obligation. In addition, we're also seeking the authorization for the refunding of DASNY's Secured Hospital Revenue Refunding Bonds, North General Hospital, Series 2003, DASNY's Secured Hospital Revenue Refunding Bonds, Interfaith Medical Center, Series 2007, and or DASNY's Secured Hospital Revenue Refunding Bonds, Wyckoff Heights Medical Center, Series 2015, and the termination of the state service contracts. Under security features for the Sales Tax Revenue Bond Program, the security includes semi-annual payments to be made pursuant to the financing agreement between DASNY and the Division of the Budget, and also a set aside of 2 cents or 50% of the state's 4% sales tax pursuant to statute and deposited into the Sales Tax Revenue Bond Tax Fund. This additional 1 cent for a total of 2 cents is now available to be dedicated since the obligations of LGAC, or the Local Government Assistance Corporation, were satisfied on April 1st, 2021. Under the security for the Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Program, again, it's the semi-annual payments to be made pursuant to the financing agreement between DASNY and the Division of the Budget. And also, the current legislation provides for 50% of the receipts from the New York State personal income tax and an employer compensation expense tax, with 50% of such receipts also deposited into the Revenue Bond Tax Fund. In addition, recent legislation authorized as part of the enacted budget provides that 50% of the receipts from the imposition of the pass-through entity tax pursuant to Article 24A of the tax law shall be deposited into the Revenue Bond Tax Fund. This is expected to be revenue neutral to the state. However, PIT receipts would decrease to the extent that qualifying entities electing to pay this tax. So to hold the Revenue Bond Tax Fund, or the RBTF, harmless and to maintain comparable security, 50% of the receipts of this tax would also be deposited into the RBTF, or the Revenue Bond Tax Fund. For the next fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022, the debt service coverage on all outstanding sales tax bonds is projected to be 5.1 times total debt service. And the debt service coverage on all outstanding state personal income tax is projected to be 5.6 times total debt service coverage. And again, when looking at the sales tax bonds, the debt service coverage on the sales tax bonds reflects the increased deposit to the Sales Tax Revenue Bond Fund from 1 cent to 2 cents as prior obligations of LGAC were satisfied on April 1st of 2021. And finally, the proposed bonds are expected to be rated AA2, AA+, and AA+. Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Matt. As I said at the beginning, a rather somewhat complicated PIT sales tax offering. Any questions or concerns? I might have a couple, but
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a quick comment on that complexity. Typically when we do a PIT or sales tax, it is for either bonding out capital projects that have been completed by the state or refinancing PIT bonds that were outstanding for savings. That's the typical structure.
Mhm.
This is basically recognizing that the state has been making payments on these various programs, and they want to consolidate these payments into the most efficient capital structure of the state, which is the PIT and sales tax. So the use of proceeds is a little different than our typical PIT and sales tax, although the security is exactly the same. And so now the state is saying to the world, our most efficient cost of capital is our PIT and sales tax. We have these couple of payments outstanding, some of which are large, the $170 million payment obligation. We'll consolidate those under the PIT and sales tax. So from a payment perspective, we have the same obligations, but from a financing perspective, a better cost of capital. It also just simplifies from DOB's perspective, Division of Budget's perspective, how they look at these obligations. So I think from the state's perspective, that is why they went through the budget process of consolidating this. And so, yes, it does look different from a use of funds perspective. And while the security is complex, every time we have a PIT and sales tax, it is a complex security in the description, but it's not different on the security side, just on the use of funds side.
thank you. Ruben. How does it just, I was a little confused on what happened to the secured hospital bond, like what happens to the hospital's obligations to repay those bonds? How does that sort of that goes away?
Unfortunately, with these hospitals, they have not been paying the debt service, so the state is paying through the service contract. So in essence, to Ruben's point, because the state is actually paying the freight, they are looking at refunding this, putting it under PIT, taking the savings up front. So from that economic view, it really makes sense that the state is gonna do this, and it was in the enacted budget.
That's my
And we, go ahead, Tracy.
No, I was
Thanks.
just gonna say that was very well stated. That is my understanding, as well. And it's from an efficiency perspective that the state is looking at this. The question though that you asked is a good one. The underlying loan agreements and mortgages
Right.
of the hospitals, are they eliminated with the new, security features of the PIT bonds?
They're not eliminated specifically with the security features of the PIT bonds. They were eliminated when we went back through and restructured all the lease agreements because of the practical reality that they were not paying anyway.
Hi, Lou.
And you may or may not recall, but we had
I'm good. How are you?
this conversation a couple of board meetings ago around the.
Well,
John,
I'm
you gotta
actually
mute,
on
John,
a
you gotta mute.
DASNY
John.
Finance Committee
John.
meeting.
John, you got to mute,
Yeah.
John. John, mute.
Okay, he's muted now.
John, we can hear your call.
Yeah, get my train of thought back. So on this transaction, what they're basically doing is we recognize they're not making the payments. Those lease terms have been renegotiated already. At the Atlantic Avenue board meeting tomorrow, Craig Scribel will kind of go through the history of these two transactions with these two facilities. But by replacing the obligation that the state has on a foregoing basis now with the PIT transaction, the state is saving somewhere between $9 and $10 million on an obligation they have otherwise. So it's much more efficient to do it this way from a cost perspective. but the lease agreements will stay in place as they are now, but the lease agreements now recognize that the payment will not be made by the underlying facility, because as you know, Tracy, if they
Right.
don't make it, they're coming to you to get money to make the
That's
payment.
right.
So it's, one hand versus the other.
That's right. Totally understand that aspect of it. They were not, these facilities were not paying, the service contract previously was covering the debt service. That was, a vehicle, the state had to come up with, and this is a more efficient vehicle. And there is still an obligation, I think is what the question is. There's still an obligation under the lease
I'm sorry, Tracy, there's still an obligation for,
of the facilities, I believe.
Right. We still have a lease agreement with the facilities, recognizing that for the short term, those payments have gone to a very low level.
if at all, if they've been made at all.
Well, they're only $10 now, so hopefully they'll make those.
Right.
But that's
But at some point, some point in the future, if the situation changes, then at least agreement can be renegotiated. But at this point, this is a recognition that it does not make sense for the state to be paying $10 million more for this obligation, given the current situation. But there is still a lease agreement outstanding. Yes, Tracy.
Great. Thank you. Yep.
What happens to the underlying boards and everything, Ruben? And I guess, does this mean that these hospitals just go off that confidential watch list that we would always get? That sort of,
Well, for better or for worse, Mr. Chairman, we still have to maintain those two boards. We have the obligation to monitor the lease. We still hold some of this, agreement, as well as some of the underlying assets as part of DASNY. So those two boards will not go away anytime soon. Although, certainly this will make all of the financial component of that obligation, much more seamless for us. So we're not, calling them every month, asking them to make a payment. They don't make it, all of that will go away.
Right. And
just,
those
I guess,
other-
okay. I get the benefits.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you. Any other question or concern, Mr. Chair, Mr. Gardner?
Yeah, and Jerry, John Johnson.
Hello, John. How are you?
Good. Is there any indication yet as to what the 2020 income tax collections are in the state versus projections?
The 2020 fiscal year ended or the 2021? I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, you want to?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. The money the state's collecting right now for the 2020 taxes that are due May 17th.
I don't have the projection of that. There will be an update to the state's disclosure coming out, I believe later on this month, and that may speak more to that.
Thank you.
You'll certainly get more than my fair share, that's for sure. So,
And I also think just, hearing from the folks on the Hill, things are better than they were projected to be, although we don't have the final numbers. Things are better than they projected to be if we had this conversation this time last year.
and I think I saw something from the controller's office along that similar line, which is good news, obviously,
Yes,
at least for the state.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns on this? If not, I'll ask for a motion to recommend approval at tomorrow's board meeting, right? This is a single approval, right? So it'll be handled by tomorrow's meeting. So can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
Second.
Second, Al, thank you very much. And all in favor, aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? None. So thank you very much. That motion carries. I realize I have number 3 on. That's Teachers College for Dave. I'm going to go to the phone because I'm going to have to get into the car, but I'm going to continue to listen and participate. You just might not see me if I can figure out how to do this, but I'll still be on the call and addressing any concerns or questions. Okay, so that's Teachers College for Dave. Thanks, Dave.
Great, thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. The Finance Committee is being asked to recommend to the full board the adoption of the necessary documents for the issuance of up to 2 series of tax exempt and/or taxable fixed and or variable rate bonds in an amount not to exceed 64 million on behalf of Teachers College. Proceeds from the proposed issuance are expected to be used to refund all or a portion of the college's Series 2012A and 2012D bonds, totaling an estimated 48.7 million. An additional 10 million in bond proceeds will fund certain new money projects, such as roof repairs and replacement, classroom renovations, and general deferred and preventative maintenance located on the college's campus buildings. The bond issuance is expected to be structured as one series of tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds. Since the 2012 A and B bonds are not callable until July 1st of 2022, the college will likely choose to utilize a forward delivery where the bonds will be sold as early as June 2021 and close on or after April 2nd of 2022, when the issuance would qualify as a current refunding. While this would result in a forward yield premium, the forward delivery will allow the college to issue tax-exempt refunding bonds while taking advantage of current interest rates. Although the transaction is expected to be structured as one series of fixed-rate tax-exempt bonds, we'll be asking the board to adopt two series resolutions tomorrow in the event the college chooses to utilize taxable bonds or to issue the new money bonds separately. The refunding is being done for interest rate savings, and assuming current market conditions, total net present value savings in the range of 8.8 million or 18.5% of the refunded bonds is expected from the refunding of the 2012 A and B bonds. Teachers College carries a rating of A1 from Moody's and A+ from S&P, both with a stable outlook. In accordance with DASNY's financing guidelines, it's anticipated that the loan agreement will be a general unsecured obligation of the college. Teachers College has been a DASNY client going all the way back to 1970, issuing 275.5 million during that time. College continues to maintain its reputation as one of the leading graduate schools of education in the nation, which is enhanced by its affiliation with Columbia University. Student demand is reflected in steady annual applications, averaging 7,190 over the last 5 years, and a consistently high matriculation ratio that has averaged nearly 51%. College has remained selective with an average acceptance rate of 53.7% over 5 years. And overall FTE enrollment has has averaged 3,429 students over 5 years. College has posted operating surpluses in 4 of the last 5 years, averaging $1.2 million annually. And lastly, Teachers College has experienced a steady increase in cash and investments over the last 5 years. Total cash and investments to operating expenses increased from 1.6 times in fiscal year 2016 to 2.2 times in fiscal year 2020. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. You're a long-term client of DASNY. Are there any questions or concerns regarding this? I don't think I have any.
Extraordinarily fine institution. I think I'm required to report to the Finance Committee. I've sought the law department's advice on this, that my wife has recently become a graduate student at Teachers College and therefore a beneficiary potentially of the transaction ultimately. And I asked the question whether I should offer a recusal. The legal staff, Sarah and Ricardo, opined that it isn't necessary, so I will vote tomorrow. So, and today, I'll vote today and I'll vote tomorrow.
And I didn't have any further questions either. I just note there is savings on the refunding aspect, which is positive, and no concerns.
Well, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to recommend approval at tomorrow's full board meeting?
So moved, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Tracy, for the second. I'm all in favor, aye.
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 And there's none opposed, that motion carries. I don't believe, because I don't have my memo in front of me, but I believe that sort of closes the financings for the Finance Committee. Am I right, Portia? Or am I missing something?
You got it.
Okay, thank you. So next up then is a motion to adjourn until our next meeting of May 19th or 18th, whatever the date is. Thank you very much.
18.
Thank you very much.
So
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, that carries, and therefore finance is now adjourned. And thank you very much. I look forward to seeing some of you in person tomorrow.